Welcome to Africa in Focus on Afrique TV Today. This is Samuel Omwenga. I am your host. We are happy that you have joined to watch the show. We bring you news, analysis, and commentary from Africa, and we know many of you do not have enough time to watch all the news in your own countries back home or even Africa for that matter. And it's for that reason we have created this show. Hopefully you enjoy watching and also learning, getting some information from Africa as a whole, and in some cases your own individual countries that we intend to cover. As part of our show, we endeavor to also reinvigorate Pan-Africanism movements to reflect the new thinking of this noble idea that was brought to us in Africa by our forefathers, founding fathers of all the African countries, having learned that concept of borrowed it from our brothers in the United States. We also aspire to produce a show on a weekly basis from which you can learn something new each time that you come to watch the show. At the same time, we're also hopeful and optimistic that at some point we can also be a show that you can count on, especially African leaders who come to Washington, to come and reach out to those of us in the diaspora who normally don't have access to know what is happening back in your respective countries. At the same time, also encouraging those of us in the diaspora to be able to participate in the political process back in our respective countries back in Africa. We have designed the show in a way such that we'll be featuring 2 to 3, sometimes 4 or 5 countries on a week, depending on what the issues are. This will give us enough time to cover those issues, at least with enough depth that you'll be able to have a grasp or an understanding of what the issues are, what is happening in those countries, their relevancy, and more importantly, what you can do being outside of Africa, those of us who are in the diaspora, what we can do to contribute either in finding solutions to some of the issues that we discuss, or even in encouraging your respective governments to do what is right, what is needed to be done in order to help our people in our respective countries in Africa. Today, we start by looking at a few countries, as I mentioned, to explore the issue of Pan-Africanism that we're going to continue discussing and looking at in all future shows that we'll be covering on this channel. So come along as we put Africa in focus, and we look forward to seeing you on the other end of the show. Welcome back. You're watching Africa in Focus on Afrique TV Today. I am Samuel Omwenga, your host. Before we start on today's countries that we're covering in the news and analysis, I'd like to first explore what the issue or what is known or what is referred to as Pan-Africanism for those of you who are not familiar with the concept. Pan-Africanism is a worldwide movement that aims to encourage and strengthen bonds of solidarity between all descendants of Africa, be they wherever they are in the world. The movement goes back to transatlantic slave trade days, and it extends beyond Africa itself and reaches out to and has substantial support in different continents, starting from the Americas, Caribbean, United States, of course, here, Europe, and Canada. The movement is based on the belief that unity is vital to economic, social, and political progress, and aims to unify and uplift the people of the Africa diaspora. Those of us who ascribe to this belief and aspirations of the Pan-Africanism movement believe that the fate of all Africans and countries are intertwined. According to one scholar, the Pan-Africanism, at the core of Pan-Africanism is a belief that African people, both on the continent and in the diaspora, share not just merely a common history, but a common destiny. Although Pan-Africanism has its roots in America, it was actually brought to Africa by the forefathers or founders of all countries in Africa, starting from one individual that I'll be discussing or talking about today. What they intended to do was to take Pan-Africanism as it was known back then, where the objective was essentially to have Africans those in America who were descendants of Africa, to find ways to go back to Africa. But what our forefathers decided to do was to take that concept and say, yeah, it's okay, you can come back to Africa, but it's also important to stay there, work with us, and we will be able to work together and collaborate and do things that will promote your interests wherever you are, but at the same time you're promoting our interests as Africans in the continent from wherever you are. This is the reason we aspire to reinvigorate this movement, because the Pan-Africanism movement, because in the last few years, I would say probably in the last couple of decades, the movement has gone back, slided back a little bit. It's not where it was supposed to be when the founders of our African countries adopted it and wanted to make it to be the core of what drives us as Africans in the globe. One of Africa's founding fathers who exemplifies the Pan-Africanism movement is Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah. The African giant had a vision not only for Africa, but also for the whole world, and his vision was the imminence of a unified world in which all sectors of society will have no choice but to work together. In this sense, Nkrumah was not seeing an Africa that became isolated in its greatness, if or when achieved, rather one where Africa was an equal and dignified member of the new world society. Nkrumah did not want an Africa that prospers, yet is treated as a subordinate member of the new world society that he envisioned. The dignity of an African people and respect for their being is central in Nkrumah's vision and remains so today for those of us who ascribe and believe in Pan-Africanism. It is for this reason that we must all be proactive in the movement, if anything, to enlighten and agitate for action, starting from holding our political leaders accountable and pushing them to do the right thing in as far as putting our houses in order is concerned. One cannot demand recognition and respect on the world stage and a seat at the table when your own house is in a mess. To have a seat at the world table and to be accorded due respect and recognition, Africa must demonstrate she is due the recognition and respect by putting in place new structures to support local freedoms, entrepreneurship, and robust economies in which middle incomes thrive and poverty is eliminated as an ill or reduced to absolute minimums tolerable, caring people can tolerate. By the way, in this show we'll be referring a lot, we'll be talking a lot, we'll refer to Africa a lot, but that could mean different things depending on the context it's used. We're hoping that it will be clear as we use it. It could mean different things such as the governments in Africa, it could mean the people of Africa, it could mean issues pertaining to cultures or to collectively or individually with one country or another. All of these things, when we say Africa, we encompass them, but what Nkrumah had a vision about Africa, when we were talking about Africa, it was comprising of all of those things, the culture, the people, the leadership, or the governance, all of those aspects of Africa and more. In other words, everything one can think or imagine about the continent, he was envisioning how that could be perfected, how that could be better than it was during independence when they were fighting for independence, and then afterwards when each country became independent. Nkrumah's point of departure was the newly created independent state, Ghana, from where he set shop to put Pan-African ideas into work. He then thereafter took his tools to shape Pan-Africanism for the rest of Africa and ultimately the rest of the world. This great man began from the concerns of individuals, moved on to address the state issues, political mostly, and freely in order to attain the desired goal of equal players in a unified world society. His use of the metaphor of the piano, the black and white keys on the piano to reflect or to show how Africans or people of African descent can be part of the global world order was very apt in how those two keyboards or those two keys are used to create harmony. Nkrumah's vision was restoration of the dignity that was lost as a result of slavery and colonialism to enable the African to function freely in the unified world society as an equal player and partner. Africa in Focus will shine light to Africa to see to what degree has this vision been reached, or what needs to be done, because first and foremost, we as Africans really must take lead in doing what needs to be done, or not to do things that should not be done to comport with Nkrumah's vision. Now, given that is really the theme of this show, I'd like to focus on a few countries to see how they're faring or doing in espousing or at least advancing Pan-Africanism in their own respects. We'll begin with Zimbabwe. Welcome back. You're watching Africa in Focus on Afrique TV. My name is Samuel Omwenga, I'm your host. Today we're shining light in 3 different countries to see how they're living up to Kwame Nkrumah's vision of Pan-Africanism. We start with Zimbabwe, where having found herself sanctioned by the West and spurned by China, the country has turned to the United Arab Emirates in its latest bid to find someone who can save the country from total economic collapse. According to Al Jazeera, Zimbabwe's government has approached the UAE in hopes of selling a stake in the national oil company. The country also wants buyers from the UAE to buy its oil. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has said the UAE investors will build solar plants in Zimbabwe, and UAE's President Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan a year ago issued a decree to open an embassy in Zimbabwe. Dubai also contributed to relief efforts when Zimbabwe was hit by cyclones last year. Zimbabwe's economy is in free fall. It's likely contracted by more than 6% last year, according to the world estimates. Half of the population needs food. Inflation is running up so high, over 500%, and its currency has depreciated more than 90% in just the one last year. Question is UAE the solution? Yes and no. If there is one thing we have known about African leaders, it is that these politicians, especially those at the top, make deals that are absolutely horrible in the long-term interests of their respective countries, all for the sake of doing something or appearing to do something about a problem that is very monumental, too monumental for them perhaps to resolve right away or find ways to resolve it within reason. But by reaching out and making these mega deals, they create the impression that they're solving the problem when in fact they're piling on the problem, especially in piling on very expensive debt, and worse than that, many, if not all of these deals have serious economic crimes behind them in terms of people taking kickbacks, corruption, all of the vices we were very familiar in almost all the countries in Africa. So the question here is, if the UAE comes to Zimbabwe, are we going to see the same thing happening, that where they come, they overburden the country with debt, or a lot of money is kicked back to individuals who benefit, but the people of the country absolutely don't, and remain in the same or even worse conditions as they are? That is an open question, but one has to go with the presumption, based on what we know about many of these countries, that is in fact going to be the case. But they can surprise us. It may just be the case that Mnangagwa does want to do a clean deal with UAE. If indeed there are no kickbacks to craft a bad deal for the people of Zimbabwe, and if the money UAE invests is put into good use, meaning to revamp the economy, then this is a worthwhile endeavor. It's a worthwhile effort, notwithstanding the sanctions against Zimbabwe, which the US imposed. US President Donald Trump extended sanctions against Zimbabwe by a year from last year, saying that the new government policies continue to pose an unusual, quote-unquote unusual, extraordinary threat, unusual and extraordinary threat to the American foreign policy. I've looked to find out exactly what that means. It's not quite clear, but renewal of the sanctions came despite calls by African leaders, including South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, for the sanctions to be lifted to give the country a chance to recover from its economic crisis. One other thing that I also noted is that not too many African leaders came to this position of defending or trying to have the United States not to impose the sanctions. A few here and there did. This is one thing you would expect the whole AU would have rallied behind and spoken as one voice. not just zero, to see to it that America does not extend these sanctions, but they did not. As is the case in every country in Africa, investment is what is needed alongside good governance to bring Africa to par with what our founding fathers fought so hard to achieve. These sanctions do not help, especially when predicated in part on grounds Mnangagwa is refusing to change Zimbabwe's laws restricting media freedom, and laws which are restricting protests in the country. The richness in irony here is palpable. Let's just say what Mnangagwa is alleged to have done against the press and protests is precisely what Trump will love to do against the press here in the United States, and as well as people who protest or against his policies. This is very obvious in all of his pronouncements, either on Twitter and everywhere that he has had a chance to say, trashing the media, bad-mouthing the media, doing everything he can to tell the world. In fact, even say it openly and quite frequently that the media is the enemy of the people, which many people find astounding, but he's doing that. At the same time, using that as the reason why we continue to impose sanctions on Mnangagwa, meaning, or rather saying that Mnangagwa is suppressing freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and media freedoms. It's quite an irony. That said, despite all of these efforts by African leaders to woo foreign investors, most investors are just not convinced these countries have attained a level of political governance and rule of law that would ensure that their investments are not subject to unpredictable political atmosphere and therefore higher risk for their investments than if they were to invest in other countries. So the sooner the leaders of Africa understand this interplay and do the necessary, meaning the sooner they realize that it's important to have good governance before they can invest, the better, and the faster or the sooner we can have foreign direct investment flowing again to many of these countries who are being denied that opportunity because investors are not quite comfortable yet that they have what it takes to protect their investments beyond the normal risks investors take. That's all we have for Zimbabwe today. Next, we shine light on Cameroon and see what is happening there. See you in a minute. Welcome back. My name is Samuel Omwenga. I'm your host and you're watching Africa in Focus on Afrique Today TV. Today, we are shining light on 3 countries in Africa to see how they are living up to Nkrumah's vision of Africa as embodied in Pan-Africanism, and we'll look at Cameroon now to see what is happening there. According to BBC, the government of Cameroon has warned it will deal quote-unquote firmly with those planning to disrupt the February 9th elections amid threats from separatists that they will prevent voting in the country's 2 English-speaking provinces. There's already heavy security in the Anglophone regions, with 800 more military police officers being sent to secure 2 towns in the northwest and southwest provinces. This region is commonly referred to as the NWSW region. Separatist fighters have said that they will restrict access in these areas for 1 week from February 7th to prevent voting from taking place, and thus the government stand warning it will firmly deal with those planning to disrupt the elections. Police patrolling the English-speaking regions have in the past been accused of brutality. Underlying all of this is the government's decision to increase the use of French in schools and courts in the NWSW region back in 2016. This region is a hotspot for Cameroon since that government's decision back in 2016, which triggered mass protests and morphed into a rebellion the following year, as some civilians, angry that the government deployed those troops, themselves took arms to try and rebuff or fight back against what they saw were excessive use of force. Cameroon, however, has long been viewed as a model of stability in the region, which is fraught with conflict. Under the surface, however, tensions still between the Anglophone and the Francophone populations have simmered for decades. The Anglophone minority, mostly concentrated in the NWSW region, has been marginalized, discriminated against, and economically disenfranchised since the referendum ended federalism and joined the two populations in a full political union back in 1972. Now, every country does have its fair share of marginalized communities, and by that is meant communities where the people within those communities are essentially disregarded, overlooked for any government projects or sharing of the national resources. They are treated as if they do not exist at all, and there's no any good reason why that is the case, but they do exist. We have every country you analyze, you find that is the case. That's just wrong. This is totally in violation of both laws on equality, which every one of these countries have in the books, as well as in the spirit of Pan-Africanism. But be that as it may, they are there, and we hope they will not be continuing. That will not continue to be the case. Now, in the interest of time, I have different other countries I wanted to share. Let me stop here and let you know that the next countries we'll be dealing with in the next week will continue to address this issue of Pan-Africanism. One thing I'd like to just take a moment to tell you about is the country of Congo, because we've been talking about Congo for some time. Even the last show, I mentioned that they were planning to do a show here in Washington. That has been confirmed, and this is in the Pan-Africanism spirit. The people who are organizing it have that in mind, and I've said that one of the reasons they're cooperating with the country, one of them is the United States Black Chamber of Commerce, which is collaborating with the country of Congo DRC to organize this trade show, which is coming in June, end of June, early July. That is a good development for both Africa and Pan-Africanism, as we've been espousing those views here. Now, that's an encouraging development, as I've noted, and we are encouraging African Americans, our brothers and sisters here in the United States, to work with us from Africa to find synergies, to find things that we can do in the spirit of Nkrumah, promoting the dignity of the African people, as well as the economic, social, and political independence in the true sense they fought for. We're not seeing that now, but we expect it to be the case going forward, starting from this collaboration that is being seen between Africans in America. We're going back to Africa, doing some things there. In the few shows I have ahead, we'll be talking about them and what they're doing. Perhaps you can also take note and participate in the same thing. That's all we have for today. Thank you for watching. Remember, you can watch this show on YouTube. You can watch it on our website, afriquetodaytv.com. You can also watch it online, on Facebook, where some of the shows are going to be streamlined live. That is by the same name, Afrique Today TV, on Facebook. Thank you again. Have a good week ahead. I look forward to seeing you back here again next week. Thank you very much.